Could Iran win this war? Are we closer to a nuclear strike? Is NATO about to change forever? And when should soldiers refuse orders? These aren't hypotheticals anymore. That's what I will be asking retired US Army General Ben Hodges. Ben, thanks for making time for Deutsche Welle.
Thank you for the privilege, Ines.
Ben, when you heard Trump talk about potentially destroying Iran, saying, I quote him here, civilization will die or bring Iran back to the Stone Ages where it belongs, what was your reaction?
Well, of course, it's appalling to hear the president talking openly about, directing U.S. forces to commit war crimes. So that's appalling, but it also, in a sad way, is not surprising that he would say something like that. The things that he said back on Easter Sunday and the things that he routinely puts out there. And what's really unfortunate, because he does this kind of thing so often, the public has become a little bit numb to it, and it damages his own credibility, frankly.
But also the credibility of the United States, of course.
Especially. So when the president says something, now I think many people are like, okay, does he really mean that? Is he going to do it? And I think the corollary to this is they have a tendency to declare victory immediately, way too soon. You remember Midnight Hammer? Within hours, they were saying that they'd obliterated all of the nuclear capability. It's impossible to have done battle damage assessment that quickly. So what they did last night, declaring that they had this wonderful deal with the Iranians, and it's turning out not to be true. That damages American credibility significantly.
Ben, there have been calls to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office. Is now the appropriate time to do so?
Today is the first time in my life I ever actually went specifically to read that amendment. Obviously I've taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution all my professional life, and I've read through it. But this is the first time I looked at the 25th Amendment, because for the first time in my life it seemed like, wow, it might actually come to that. Now, frankly, I don't think there are enough Republicans in Congress to have the courage to do this for a variety of reasons. So it certainly seems unlikely, but it's not good for America that we're in a situation where many people think that that's a necessary solution.
Do you personally think so?
Well, as you know, I campaigned against him because I thought that he was such a threat to the Constitution. And I think there's a reason that the Constitution offers a remedy for these kinds of situations. And, everything I see about him would indicate that he is not fit. But just as guilty are all these his enablers, people that are around him, that, the same people that complained about President Biden with Sleepy Joe and, couldn't stay awake and all these kinds of things. Now the same people tolerate this kind of behavior and statements, and it just really seems they bear a lot of responsibility for where we are right now too. But look, we live in a democratic system. Democracy is not ballet. It is rugby football all the time. And so the best way to do this is to win at on election day, both midterms and the next presidential election. That's by far the best remedy.
Ben, Vice President Vance's Hungary speech raised fears for many of a nuclear strike. Do you think this is realistic in the foreseeable future?
I think that's extremely unlikely. You will have seen the reporting that during Trump 1, the Chief of Staff, General Kelly, talked him out of it when he was talking about it, when he points out all the downsides of it. And so I think that President Trump understands better now than he did last time. There's no upside to the United States launching a preemptive nuclear strike. particularly when you're talking about something like Iran or that kind of a situation. So it just and this is why it's so important that you have people around the president that say, no, we're not going to do this, Mr. President. Unfortunately, the Secretary of Defense is a creature that will only do whatever the president says, and he'll never push back. And he's steadily trying to get rid of all the other people that would push back. I think at some point, people are going to have to say, no, absolutely not. Right now, it seems like all the pressure is on people in uniform. And I'm very disappointed that more of the four stars, retired four stars, have not been speaking out against these kind of things. And so the pressure remains on General Kane and the others who are in uniform, and obviously, because they're in uniform, they cannot publicly speak out against things.
We talked about that in other interviews before, but as this is such a outstanding, special moment in history, I really want to ask you if there could be a moment when soldiers in uniform should not obey orders, when they should.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. There's a reason that we reiterate our oath to the Constitution at every opportunity, whether it's a promotion ceremony or when a soldier reenlists for another 2 or 3 or 4 years. We always reaffirm that oath because we wanted it to be in the fiber of every man and woman in the armed forces so that they were reminded constantly, you exist to defend the Constitution. Yes, the president's the commander in chief, but that's not who your loyalty is to. And this administration has been doing all they could to undermine that, to get people that are loyal to them and who might be willing to do things that in the past would never have been even considered. So, we have to make sure that our men and women in uniform are confident that their leaders are not going to push them to do something that is illegal. And this is where, the top leadership of the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, they have to protect the men and women below them from these illegal orders. And I think it's important that people are reminded. I'm old enough to have been a cadet at West Point right after the end of Vietnam. So when I started in 1976, Vietnam was fresh in everybody's memory. All of my instructors had served in Vietnam, and they constantly talked to us about the difference between lawful and unlawful orders. And the My Lai massacre was an example that was used all the time, and that you cannot say, well, I was just following orders as an excuse. And so it was drilled into my head as a brand new cadet that I had a responsibility to know the difference. The burden was on me to know the difference between a lawful order and an unlawful order.
Thank you for sharing this, Ben. Trump said they have a ceasefire. Do you think the ceasefire will hold?
Well, obviously it's not already here in the first 24 hours. Israel launched a massive strike on Hezbollah targets in Beirut. There have been dozens of other missile strikes against different targets in the Middle East. And so I don't think there is a ceasefire at this moment. Now, in the next 2 or 3 days, as people start asserting control, maybe that does happen. But I was skeptical when I first heard that on the plan that the Iranians submitted and that the president supposedly approved or said agreed was a good basis for starting, that there would be no operations in Lebanon, no operations against Iranian proxies like Hezbollah or the Houthis. I thought, well, there's no way that Israel will agree to that. And of course they haven't. So I'm skeptical. Now, I will say this. I'm glad that the president did not follow through with his threat last night. I mean, that would have been catastrophic for millions and millions of people. And there would have been nothing good to come out of it. So I'm glad he did not follow through. But who knows what comes next in 2 weeks. He's famous for these 2-week things, and I'm sure he's hoping that the problem just sort of goes away. But as long as As long as insurers are not willing to insure vessels moving through the Strait of Hormuz, the strait is in effect still blocked. And as long as gas prices stay up over $4, um, this is going to be a problem for them.
Talking about Trump and Iran, Ben, why hasn't Trump made any real progress with this country? I mean, his usual tactics obviously don't work. What's different about Iran?
Well, first of all, the language that he used, that he and Secretary Hegseth use, has always been so over the top, hyperbolic. We'll never let them do this. We're going to do this, and so on. And they do not have professional diplomats working on the problem. Instead, you still got Witkoff and Kushner, and nobody trusts them. Nobody. And they're not skilled. Maybe they're good at real estate deals, but they're not skilled at diplomacy, especially when you're dealing with the Iranians, who have been doing this for about 3,000 years. And so I think this is part of the problem. And then part of the problem was the ego of the president. For him, they had complained so much about the JCPOA. He had trashed it back during Trump 1, and now I think if he could get JCPOA now without having Obama's name ever attached to it, he would jump on it because it would give him a way out of a situation that he has created. So his inability to acknowledge that President Obama or somebody else might have done something that was good, that's part of why we are where we are.
How could a real off-ramp look like for him?
Well, right now is when you really need a lot of allies and other countries that could put pressure on Iran, or that could find ways to do things that would get the oil moving again, and would get the Atomic Energy Agency back in there. I mean, this is where other countries could play a critical role. I mean, the Iranians are also in a difficult position. They can't be seen as giving in to the Americans either, or to Israel. And so having interlocutors that could do that. And so if we had a bunch of allies, as we do, 31 of them in NATO, plus other friends, instead of kicking them in the ass all the time and threatening them, right now would be really good to have that kind of help. And look, I'm not against almost any of the things that the administration has done against the Iranians. The Iranians took over our embassy in Tehran in 1979 when I was still a cadet. So for my entire adult life, Iran has been an enemy of the United States. Their support for terrorism has killed hundreds of American soldiers and Marines, as well as innocent people from other countries. So I think that finding a way to prevent them from continuing to support terrorism is absolutely a worthy goal. But because it's worthy and it's obvious, why doesn't the president make the case to the Congress and get the support of the American people? Why does he demonstrate he doesn't think he needs to do that? This would be a much more effective way to do this, I think.
Could Iran win this war?
Well, I think you have probably already seen, as have I, headlines or reports of people saying that the United States has suffered a strategic defeat. Just like in Vietnam, we bombed the hell out of North Vietnam and killed tens of thousands of Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers. But at the end of the day, it was the Vietnamese flag was flying over Saigon, now known as Ho Chi Minh City. And so it's not about how many ships or planes you destroy or how many weapon systems you destroy. It's, did you achieve the strategic outcome that you wanted? And I would say clearly, when you look at what came out last night, the claim Iran still has 500 kilograms of enriched uranium. I doubt we know exactly what all is there, despite whatever Mr. Hegseth said. They now control the strait, whereas before this, ships were moving through there. The regime is still in place. It was the IRGC that controlled things before this all started. So I don't see how it's anything but a strategic defeat for the United States as it stands right now. In the coming days, more things may come to light. I hope so. Um, but once again, our women and men of armed forces have been betrayed by feckless civilian leadership.
You mentioned NATO. How will the current situation, the current administration, if you wish, will change NATO?
Even the Trump administration knows that America's biggest trading partner is Europe as a bloc. And so it's in the economic interest of the United States that Europe is prosperous, which means it has to be stable and secure. So it's in our interest that we do what's necessary to help protect Europe. Uh, Also, what we get from our allies in Europe is the ability to conduct operations, support operations, to fly from bases and ports all over Europe. That's for us. They're not there guarding Germans or Italians. This is for us. And I think that, in fact, I feel very confident that the senior military leadership is telling the secretary and is telling the president, we will be screwing ourselves if we try to pull out of NATO. I mean, it would be a disaster. But that's a gift for the Kremlin. I mean, that's the Kremlin has tried this since 1949, and so here, this administration seems to want to do it for them. Um, but as always, whenever you and I discuss this topic, European countries are still way behind on being able to fulfill their own part of the Washington Treaty, which is Article 3, which says that each nation has to be able to defend themselves. And too many countries in NATO cannot do that yet. And so this is always going to make it difficult for the pro-NATO people to keep making the case.
Talking about the Kremlin, NATO, and Europe, how does this war affect Ukraine?
It was a little over a year ago that President Zelensky was in the Oval Office getting yelled at by the president and the vice president, and this ridiculous assertion that you got no cards and all of that. And here we are today, where Ukraine is helping countries in the Gulf defend themselves against Iranian drones. And they probably are going to have Ukrainian defense industry being supported by Saudi money and money from the Emirates to purchase Ukrainian defense capabilities, even though the American president said we don't need anything from them. So what an amazing turn of events. And I think it certainly has been borne out over the last few weeks that not only can Russia not defeat Ukraine, but that it's actually moving in the wrong direction in terms of casualties and in territory. And the dreaded winter is over. The Ukrainians are never going to quit, and they can see how this is, and this is where I think for European countries, the best way to defend Europe is by making sure that Ukraine wins, and Ukraine is doing their part. I think the future of Ukraine, their security guarantee is becoming like Israel, having a massive defense industry, having a very effective rapid mobilization, and having all of society totally bought into the defense. And I think the GUR is going to be like the Mossad, going out and getting all of these the Russians who have been responsible for war crimes against Ukraine.
At this point, how does a realistic end to the Ukraine war look like?
Well, the Ukrainians, I think, are on a path to victory, and that is by the destruction of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. I mean, they've already made huge impacts there, and as they continue to grow their own capabilities, and as European countries say, you know what, I'm going to invest in Ukraine's ability to make long-range precision weapons that can go 2,000 kilometers and hit a refinery. This is how Russia is eventually brought to the table for when they can no longer pay for this.
Ben Hodges, as always, thank you so much.
I always enjoy our conversations, Ines. Thank you.